Hello everybody, so we are today at COP24 and we will start a new side event dedicated to the Mediterranean area and with our partners Union pour la Méditerranée and also FEMISE, Institut de la Méditerranée, and you are now here on the Energy 2050 pavilion. So our today topics will be socio-economic topics related to climate change toward an EU-made research agenda and action. So we'll try to see how policy and research can be taken and transferred into action, in the agenda of action, and how it can serve also the implementation of the policy we are here designing and discussing on. So I will lead the floor to Constantin Tsakas from Institut de la Méditerranée, who will organize and lead the panel, and I will come back to you after when you will give me the speech.
Thank you very much, Stéphane. Thank you all of you for following this event. Thank you to Union for the Mediterranean for associating with us to this event. So the topic of this workshop will be about socio-economic intricacies related to climate change towards an EU-made research agenda and actions. And here we have a panel of different practitioners, but also economists, as well as policymakers that can share their views on this multi-stakeholder approach. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Jorge Borrego, who is the UFM Senior Deputy Secretary General on Energy Climate Action, and who can speak a bit more about the priorities of Union for the Mediterranean on building this research agenda. Jorge?
Thank you. Good morning. It's our pleasure to partnership this event with Energy 2050. And of course, we are here in the COP really to enlighten the mission and the mandate that we receive from our member countries regarding the climate change issues, the energy transition, which both of them are my portfolio. And in this, I would like to refer the three levels of areas that from the mandate received from the member countries we are acting in. First, we are acting regarding the NDCs which all of our member countries presented, because all of them are signatories from the Paris Agreement. And our work is from an assessment of the NDCs to work in a regional policy dialogue, to work in them to establish, identify and establish synergies, and to design possible sub-regional joint actions to be taken under their national action plans, and also to support them in the monitoring activities of the NDAs preparing the 2020 revision. The second dimension is the climate finance one. We start in 2016-17 working on that. We present the first report on climate finance dimension in the region. Actually, today, end of the day, we will present here the second report regarding the consolidated data of 2016, enlightening that we received in the region $1.3 billion, more or less 13% of the overall climate finance in the world, which is good regarding our GDP, regional GDP, but it's far from the target, because as you imagine, even at the world level, we didn't reach the 100 billion US dollars each year. So there is a work to do, and mainly in the region there is a work to do in two dimensions. The first one is that adaptation and mitigation are quite unbalanced. Adaptation only takes less than 1/3 of the total amount, and other part is that there is an unbalance, a strong imbalance between the beneficiary countries in the region. 3 to 5 countries take more than 60% of the overall amount. So we need to work at them, and one of the things that we will present today is also a first assessment of the probable opportunities, not barriers, but opportunities to increase and better balance the access between countries. The third dimension I would like to refer, taking into account that our basic objective is to involve private sector regarding investment and to involve people. People is the key tool for the success. People, namely, pushing for better gender balance in the interventions and pushing for youth people. Youth they are obviously interested in the issue because they will live with the consequences of our actual actions, but also because they have naturally the conviction that we can change something in the world, and that's true. We had at that age the same conviction, and we are trying to do something to change. So, and the major information that and attitude that we receive from them is that please don't talk about us, please talk with us, and that is why we are supporting a Mediterranean Youth Climate Network, born in 2016 in Morocco, embracing the most part of the region countries representatives. So it's from north and from south. So this is an important movement. We will have a meeting organized with them also on next Friday. And finally, let's come to the scientific dimension. And at that point, I will be short because at my side there is a representative and one of the souls of the network. So I will not replace his capacity and his knowledge on the issue. Just saying that with the scientific dimension approach, we try to give substance to political decisions to be taken. Although they are independent, they are an independent panel, the MedECC network, involving, if I'm not wrong, because numbers may change every day, but involving around 400 scientists. Of course, this is a large number, but there are a group, a sort of steering committee of which manage the work. Our UFM Secretariat activity is to support their activities because they are independent. That is the major value we see on this relationship. But being independent doesn't prevent to provide them a debate platform and to use their information, as I said, to support political decisions to be made, to clarify and to better detail some root causes of the IPCC major conclusions, because we are in the Mediterranean region, we are not recognized as a Pacific region under the Framework Convention for Climate Change. So this is a contribution that we provide also to the IPCC with whom we are related. And therefore, with those details and that capacity to foreseen, to identify situations and to foreseen, to bring also a certain identification of potential priorities to be taken in our action scope for the future. So I would like to, but this time I will not use the major findings already available from the first report that will be presented tomorrow. I will ask Joël Guiot to do it along this talk. It's his privilege because it is their work. So that being said, I think that we will have occasion to to increase a little more, but let's move to another.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, and for highlighting the fact that climate change is more an opportunity to discuss on cooperation and on going forward in terms of scientific research. So without further ado, the introductions have already been made. I will give the floor to Joël Guiot, who is representing MedECC, and Joël will talk about how MedECC is an essential scientific platform that provides a lot of insights, foresights as to climate change and sustainable development issues. Joël?
Thank you very much, Constantin. And thank you for invitation to Énergie 2050 and for UFM who has invited me to come here. And I have also to tell that MedECC, I will present you in a few minutes, but MedECC is funded mainly thanks to Union for the Méditerranée. It's important because without the money of this Union of the Méditerranée, it should not be possible to make the work I will present you. We have also alternative funding, French ADEM, the university where I am working, and so on. And in fact, what I would like to tell you is energy, it's a solution for the climatic change. But for that, before that, we need to know the state of the art of the climatic change. And it is the role of MedECC. It's to arrive to an improved scientific assessment of climate and environmental change in the Mediterranean basin. And maybe you could tell why MedECC is necessary. Because we have IPCC, and IPCC is already doing some very good job at the international level, at the global level. But in fact, if you look at the IPCC report, we are now preparing the 6th report. The Mediterranean is not a particular region in this report. Mediterranean is shared between Europe, in the south of Europe, in the north of Africa, and in the east, it is the Middle East, and there is no particular chapter on the Mediterranean. And we know all that Mediterranean is an integrated region, and we have fluxes of pollution, of economical fluxes, also a flux of knowledge between the different parts of the Mediterranean. And it is a pity not to work on the Mediterranean in a whole. And it is the objective of MedECC is to do that. In fact, the Mediterranean region is particularly vulnerable. We know that if we are at the moment at a global warming of 1 degree above the pre-industrial level, it is what reveals the last report of IPCC. And in the Mediterranean, the warming is maybe 20% faster than for the globe. And the speed of the rate of speed has increased particularly during the 30 last years. Thus, we have an accelerated climatic change in the Mediterranean. It's due to climatic change, but it's also due to by greenhouse gases, but it's also due to land use change, to increasing pollution, and also we have as a consequence a declining of the biodiversity. And MedECC has distinguished the 5 vulnerable domains. You know them. It's water. Water is maybe the most difficult domain, the most vulnerable domain. Ecosystems, food, health, and security. And what we try to do is to propose a help for decision makers, for policies, for sustainable development of the Mediterranean countries, to mitigate there's a risk of change. And the ambition of MedECC is to develop a scientifically robust assessment and synthesis of change and its impact in the Mediterranean basin based on published research. Thus, it is in peer-reviewed journal. Thus, we don't do new research. We try to make a good synthesis of what is existing in the literature, in the scientific literature. And the final objective is produced by the end of the next year, a report, an assessment report, of about maybe 500 pages, which will be synthesis in a small summary. It's called a summary for policymakers, like for IPCC, and that summary will be approved by the representatives of the government. We have just to organize that approval under the umbrella of Union for the Mediterranean, and also the UNEP map, the Mediterranean Action Plan. At the moment, as Jorge told, we are a network of 400 scientists from 35 countries. And to write this report, we have selected about 70 scientists. Now it's done. We have this small club of 70 scientists, and they have started to work on the first draft. The first draft is supposed to be produced at the end of this year, maybe at the beginning of next year. And the draft will be discussed in a meeting of the authors in March, which will be done in Milano. And we will have to discuss all together the coherency of that draft. And finally, the second draft will be discussed by external reviewers. It will be open to everybody. It is a transparent process, and all the scientists who wants to make comments on the second draft will have the possibility to do that. It will be public. And at the moment, the way to work, we have a steering committee. It's about 20 persons which are the steering committee. It's coordinated by myself and Wolfgang Kramer. And I have also to tell that the part of the authors of the MedECC report are also in the IPCC process. And for the sixth report, there will be a special chapter for Mediterranean. It is the first time. This chapter will be a short chapter, but it is important that because IPCC has recognized the importance of the Mediterranean for the process of the IPCC report. This a few words on the agenda. At the moment, we have done a call for authorships. It's done. Just I told you that we have 70 authors. And the authors will produce 3 drafts, and the last draft will be the final draft at the end of next year. And this draft will be summarized in the same time by the steering committee to produce a summary of about 20 pages. At the moment, the 70 authors are coming from 25 countries, and the main countries are Spain, Italy, France, Greece, Portugal, Morocco, Israel, Tunisia, Malta, and Lebanon. It is the most important countries in terms of the numbers of authors. And I have to give you a few words about the outline of the report. The first chapter is the context, it's introduction, it's classical. The second chapter is the driver of environmental impact. It's climatic change, pollution, land and sea use change, extraction, exploitation of natural resources, and also non-indigenous species. The third chapter will be devoted to water, food, energy nexus, ecosystem and ecosystem services. And the third part of this challenge chapter will be development, health, and human security. And human security will include the migration. It's very important in the Mediterranean. And the last chapter, it's managing future risk and building resilience of the Mediterranean. It will be devoted to the best practice and policies for adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable development. And you see that energy is a part of the chapter 4 because it's a solution for managing, for mitigation of the climatic change. But it is also a part of the challenge, because the climatic change is also an impact of the energy production. Just you see in energies in both sides. And we will have also some section on training and capacity building, because it's very important to take some resource on capacity building and training for the young generation in particular. And at the moment we have produced like a foundation paper. It has been published last month in Nature Climatic Change. It's like a statement of the challenge for the Mediterranean. And we have now also produced a booklet which will be presented tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in the Moroccan pavilion. And that booklet is in fact reproduce the outline of the future report. But we are already at the stage to produce some results about the climatic change in the Mediterranean. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Joël, for this very rich presentation about what MedECC is doing. I will also include some words as to what FEMISE is doing in this theme, and then I will give the floor to Stéphane, who can complement on the joint study that we've produced. So I'm representing Institut de la Méditerranée, and Institut de la Méditerranée, we're an economic institute based in Marseille, and we're coordinating this network called FEMISE, which is Forum Euro-Méditerranéen des Instituts de Sciences Économiques, which is basically a think tank funded by the European Commission, by DG NEAR, to focus on dialogue, how to promote dialogue between two shores on all issues related to Euromed relations. So concretely, we have 4 thematic axes. We have the environmental axis, of course, in which environment and energy, we've collaborated a lot with Energy 2050 in recent years, and we've produced 2 reports. One is the one that was presented yesterday, which talks about subnational governments, the place of subnational governments in the climate change agenda, and how subnational governments can cooperate at the level of the EU-Med cooperation. And the second one is a report that focuses more on the macro aspect, which is more like a panorama of what is happening in the South Med with regard to NDCs, and which is updated annually. And this was instigated by Energy 2050, actually, 2 or 3 years ago. And then we joined them because they're an actor that really put a lot of energy into all this. So we focus on the environmental axis. We also produce a series of policy briefs called Med Briefs, and a lot of them focus on environmental issues, and they're published quite regularly. They're very, very short texts that are destined essentially to policymakers, which take, let's say, the results of academic research and vulgarize them in a way, render them much more acceptable, much more accessible and much more policy relevant, let's say. They focus on the policy impact. We also fund research with regards to environmental efficiency and so on. But we also fund research that is not directly related to the environment, but in which we always try to introduce an environmental component. Meaning the other 3 thematic axes that we have are trade integration, and we really believe that trade integration and the environment are really related, because these are also some discussions that we had with DG Trade when we went to Brussels some months ago, and they told us that within the associations agreements between the European Union and the South Med countries, there are lots of issues related to going towards a deeper free trade agreement, whether it be bilateral or whether it be multilateral, with Morocco, with Tunisia, and so on. There are always discussions on having the assessment, the economic assessment of these agreements, trying to see which one benefits more, which sector, etc., etc. But what lacks often is the environmental component. So it would be nice, we believe, to fund more studies that focus on the environmental component of trade integration and try to see the best ways to integrate the two shores and the environmental impact and which sectors can benefit from it. We also focus on private sector development. and innovation. We're also part of another EU-funded project that is called the Next Society, also funded by Degenier, and in which we collaborate with the Anima Investment Network, which is based in Marseille. And the idea here is to try to foster an ecosystem of innovation in the South Med, innovation for SMEs in the South Med. And what we do, what FEMISE does, is we do two things. We try to create a framework, a scoreboard of innovation, where we try to see all the indicators of innovation input, innovation output in the South, to try to find the strengths of weaknesses in each country with regards to innovation, but also to try to find niches, sectors in which South Med countries have firms that are potentially competitive at the international level. And among the rising stars, let's say, of the South Med countries in terms of innovation, sometimes we identify firms that are related to energy efficiency, that are related to issues related to sustainable development, and we believe that more needs to be done with regards to this aspect. Try to see if the South Med countries could potentially have firms that are efficient in terms of new energy, sustainable development, and so on, and whether they could be competitive at the international level. So that is also another axis we focus on. And the last axis is related to inclusiveness, to issues related to social entrepreneurship, youth empowerment, and so on. And in which we fund research. We're going to have a report that is going to come out quite soon, which is on private sector development and inclusiveness. It includes a whole chapter dedicated to social entrepreneurship. So we did a sort of mapping of social entrepreneurship initiatives in the South Med. Social entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs that, let's say, do not only focus on the lucrative aspect of a business, but also on fostering more jobs, reducing gaps in terms of inequalities, whether it be urban and rural, whether it be between women, men, and so on. And among these social entrepreneurs, a lot of them have launched environmental initiatives related to waste management, for example, related to energy efficiency. So all of these will be highlighted in this report that is going to come out by January 2019, if my memory is correct, and will be publicly available on the FEMISE website. So all of that is to say that we believe that we need to focus on the environment as a theme. Environment needs to be a theme in which we work on. But environment is more than that. It should not be just one theme that is completely, let's say, apart from other thematic axes. The environment is something that is transversal, is something that we find in everything. So this is something that we try to do. Instigate thought about the environmental impact in each thematic axis that we follow. And so, well, apart from that, apart from the traditional research that we're doing, we also believe in the need to make data more accessible, not only with regards to the environment, but regarding the environment, it's quite scarce in the South Med countries, and I think that Abeer, you can talk a little bit more, since you're a researcher from Egypt. This is a problem that you've been facing quite a lot. So we try to mobilize local actors in each South Med countries to hopefully go towards contributing to create a South Med data observatory, not only on environment, but on all socio-economic and environmental indicators. That is a big plan that we would like to create in a multi-stakeholder approach, of course. So, anyways, that is to sum up more or less what FEMISE is doing with its 4 thematic axis, and in general to sensibilize policymakers and to try to make data more accessible. Now I'll give the floor to Stéphane, who can delve more into the specifics of the big study in which we work together, and which, in a way, I would call it the flagship report of Energy 2050, because it has a truly high impact. Stéphane?
Thank you, Constantin. So maybe I will give also some few words about Energy 2050 and why we produce this kind of reports, and also what we are really doing on climate change. By the way, you are all the topic here we are working on, and we are working on the so-called systemic approach of sustainable development and climate change. And by the way, we work through the governments until the project-based implementation, and also thanks to City also, we co-share the pavillon with UCLGA. So there's a powerful network of cities in Africa, and we are working with them on a climate change task force to raise access for cities to go to climate funding, and we have a lot of activities on this kind. So, by the way, we we have a vision that we need to work on Nexus, as you already mentioned, Joël, and it's absolutely crucial. And before the, let's say, the Paris Agreement, everything was more in silo at the end and as a top-down approach. And now, because we just reverse the process, we need more than ever to incorporate so many topics to be endorsed by country, but also at the local level and for all stakeholders, that at least we need to rethink somewhere we were in advance. I just want to explain you why we are here in this scope. We have been doing 7 INDC. We have been supporting countries to have access to green climate finance. We have a carbon methodology, so-called ETI carbon. We are producing the guide for negotiation. So this is the big handbook for all the negotiation, French and English, to explain the negotiation process for delegates. So this is very technical. And at the end, we do the same things with all level of stakeholders, for cities to enterprise and some others. So, and again, to go to reports, besides the ones already Constantin mentioned, we will launch in few days. So we just are late a review on INDC. Because everybody speaks about INDC, but I'm not so sure many guys have been involved in INDC design. So about the lack of data, the difficulties for policies, the ways that they will incorporate or no adaptation, which is connected with the negotiation process. There will be 1, 2 different registry, what will be the transparency, the reporting process, data to be incorporated. So it's very good to think about, okay, what we should need to do, but what is the reality these guys can endorse in the political process at the end. So for us, going back to research and reports and producing knowledge, this is not just to produce something to add to the debate, but it has to be transferred somewhere in concrete application. So when we produce data, it's because these guys will need one day to put in place such a very detailed, precise MRV scheme to be in position to make some report. But the same topics for local governments. Everybody to speak about localization, territorialization of INDC, they just open a black door to say, okay, we want to, but by the way, everything has to be data, performance indicators, to be in position to track change and to federate. And if we have a cost analysis, if we don't make the link between what we can win on a sector, as soon as you put some example from buildings, this is you avoid emission. You avoid consumption. You create opportunities to develop something. So we need to work also on this locking effect approach. And I know that EPCC also is focusing. I was involved in the previous one on the special reports on renewable energy sources in a few years ago, let's say. And so everything is this kind of picture we work on, trying to make bridge and to, at the end, implement concretely on the ground project under Horizon 2020, European and some others. So this is the way we worked. Going back to the reports mentioning by Constantin, this is the baby, this one. This is now the 3rd edition or the 4th edition, I don't remember. And we start to produce this information for the MedCCC in Tanger. And because we go more deeper than the, let's say, what they expect, we just think it was helpful. Because by the way, we discussed this point yesterday, we have many networks in this region. And many networks which just push some specific topics on the table, which is very important. But at the end, the global vision is quite fragmented. So we are really happy also, and we will welcome the MedECC report, not like the EPCC one here, because for countries we are not even welcoming the 1.5 degrees report 2 days ago. So it's just a crazy story, but this is a story. So we will be more than happy to have this huge amount of data because we need it. And this is the official word, welcome, in the negotiation process. So by the way, to say that we need data, but we need also to transfer this data in the policy frameworks to find some, let's say, way to at least raise attention, but also at least also open opportunities. We discussed yesterday the point, for example, to mix the different agenda. It's very important. The SDG one, the NDC one, and also, why not the urban one, and also coastal area ones, biodiversity ones. So all these agendas somewhere have some articles which are connected. So research by now need to at least create bridge, because it will be rather complex. The huge amount of data you will produce will create huge, let's say, number of projects, of specific projects to be applied on specific issue. But our concern at Energy 2050, and we are also glad to work with FEMISE and Institut Méditerranée, we are member. And why? Because we need also to have an economic approach. Because if we just focus on this is an opportunity because of whatever you consider, for gender issue, for energy, for coastal protection, for whatever you decide to. But at the end, we will not have enough money to fulfill the requirement. So this is critical. So we need to transfer this knowledge on an economic perspective to scale some approach to be in position to duplicate, because it is not possible to protect all the coastal area in the Mediterranean region. Even if we want, it is not possible to protect from salinity, the ground agriculture, to, let's say, limit cities, the expansion, where there are some resources, some water, and some constraints. So we need to find a way to be in position to measure project. So the MRV speaking, you were speaking on, MRV, measurable, reportable, verifiable. So everything, all this project has somewhere the same requirement. Provide data to be consistent. And data at the local level needs somewhere in the very next future to be exactly the same that policymakers at the national level will refer to the different convention. If not, it will be something to be very so poor that we will miss, let's say, the official negotiation calendar, whatever the ones you consider. And for the local government, they need also to be part of the national commitment. So if we want that, research need to give these guys the way that they, I'm looking to my friend from Marseille, but it can be for applied everywhere. So if we need these important also stakeholders to be in position to say concretely, we take our part of these commitments because of we are very connected with realities, with the concrete things. They need also to be in position to provide exactly the same information to be needed at the different level, regional ones, thanks to Union for Mediterranean, the PAM and some other stakeholders, but also at local city level, regional level, and also at the national one. So this is why we are so committed in this approach, but we are project-based, so we want something to be concretely implemented, and this is why we produce this kind of reports back to some real project on the ground. So thank you for that, and I give you back the floor, Constantin.
Thank you very much, Stéphane, and very synthetic, very good presentation of the report and your different initiatives. Now we're going to have a more technical presentation. We're very happy to have with us Karolina Zubel, who is from CASE, a think tank based in Warsaw, also a member of the FEMISE network, and who's going to talk about Europace, which is a project that CASE is leading to develop a financing mechanism to unlock the potential for deployment of energy saving and generation technologies to European households. So Karolina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Constantin. Good morning, everyone. I'm actually going to change the angle a bit because I will talk about the Europace project, which is predominantly about unlocking energy efficiency renovation at the very local level, but also because this project is from the very beginning linking research with action. Let me tell you in a couple of slides why is that the case. So let's start with a couple of statistics, because we very rarely know that we tend to spend around 90% times indoors. And given that 1 in 6 Europeans is actually living in unhealthy homes, this is terrible for our health and increases chances of getting asthma even for up to 40%. At the same time, when we decide to retrofit our home, it's not only good for us, for our health, but also for our building's property value, because well, the statistics vary, but in general, the property can be of a higher value between 5 and 12%. What is even more, and from my perspective, even sorry. Even more important is the fact that Europace, or actually any kind of retrofit, would be very beneficial for improving the energy performance of buildings and also fighting the energy poverty. When we speak about this energy component, when it comes to the buildings, it's very effective to say that buildings are actually responsible for the largest share of European final energy consumption. So at the same time, they represent the greatest potential for the energy improvement. That's because 80% of the buildings in the EU were built before 1990. And still, buildings are actually those assets, the very long-term assets that we will have for 50 years or more. At the same time, the building rate of the new buildings is around 1% yearly. That means that 97% of the buildings in the EU are still to be renovated. This number is impressive. So, knowing all this, keeping this in mind, we actually came up with an idea of putting right legislation, innovative financing, action and capacity sharing in one place. And we created a model which is predominantly based on the American PACE financing model, which stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, and is also based on the idea that building renovation is actually not just a private business, but it's also a public priority. So going further, improving homes and commercial buildings is considered a public good, and municipalities and cities can actually use their power of taxation to collect additional payment for the space assessment together with property taxes. So what is so innovative about this financing I told you about? Well, basically, non-single payment beforehand was collected together with the property tax. This means that Europace payments are actually segregated from the municipal budget, and it makes it very simple repayment for us, for the final consumers. At the same time, it's also 100% private financing that the municipality gets from private investors who are secured because Europace is a senior lien on the property and is therefore recorded as a separate charge and cannot accelerate in terms of foreclosure. Last but not least, it's also important to mention that Europace can be transferred to the new owner when you decide to sell your property. So it's not the financing that stays with the property owner, but the financing that stays with the property. Another issue, or actually the very beneficial part of Europace, is that it very well fits to this one-stop shop concept so much promoted by the European institutions, because as a final customer you get the affordable upfront financing together with technical assistance. So it's a whole package. And given the strong consumer protection policies in place, you are also sure that this is something that is reliable. On the other hand, from the investor's perspective, these projects are aggregated and put in a whole bag. So the investor actually gets more profit because the projects are scalable. Our consortium is, for the time being, consisting of 8 partners from 4 different countries, and since the project lasts for 3 years, we've actually just started in March this year, we decided to somehow divide it into 3 different pillars. The very first one is obviously the research component, but to implement it and somehow enhance it, in parallel to the research phase, we are also doing a pilot study in Olot city in Catalonia. And once these 2 components are somehow delivered, we are going to facilitate and support 4 other leader cities, so we will basically scale the whole project. So speaking about the first pillar, which is predominantly about the methodology, the research agenda, we somehow divided it again into 2 different parts. The very first step has just been completed. We basically analyzed legal and fiscal frameworks of the EU 28 in order to decide which countries in the EU are more suitable for Europace development. And based on this first task, we chose 7 countries, about which I will tell you in a bit, which went to the second stage of the project, the research phase of the project, about the market assessment. In the very general terms, the aim of this first pillar was to assess the on-tax suitability landscape in the EU by analyzing the demand levels from households and other constructors, to prepare the future securitization of the pools for capital deployed. So this was something that investors were very, very curious about. And last but not least, to understand the feasibility of on-tax financing of the investment at household level. So I prepared this very short slide about how we actually divided the first step of the methodology. We created 4 different tables which were answering 4 different needs. The very first thing was about the legal framework. So we've been basically checking the property taxation system in each and every country. Then we moved to municipal capacities and further enforceability of local taxes. So we basically wanted to find out whether investors' needs are secured enough in order to have this financing on board. And last but not least, we also assessed social perception towards local taxes and property taxes, most of all. So altogether, we created 112 tables that were graded accordingly. And based on those tables, we came up with the map. The countries that you see in red are those that we consider a non-go option for the time being, given that they don't have any property taxes in place. Those you can see in green are those that we found the most adequate to have Europace implemented. But since those green ones are not that many, we somehow pulled them up with those recorded as yellow ones, so those that are moderately adequate for the Europace development. And based on this map, we chose Austria, Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, and Romania to go to the second pillar, which you can see now, and is basically about social and economic conditions of households, building characteristics and ownership, energy consumption in private residential buildings. But we are at the moment also finding out about the barriers and policies related to EE and renewables in those specific countries. We are pursuing with this study, and I can tell you that all the 7 separate country reports will be ready in March. But as I said, in parallel to that, we are doing a pilot study in Olot to somehow get the insights from the ground. Olot is a small city in north of Catalonia, where energy efficiency and renewables have a terrible potential. And this pilot study also has been somehow divided into 3 different parts, so we can know which one is going well, which one is actually lagging behind. And for the time being, we are seeking national legal amendment to facilitate scalable Europace implementation across the country. At the same time, we are learning and testing citizens' needs and attitudes when it comes to energy efficiency, home renovation. But what is probably the most important aspect for us for now is developing a scalable financing tool, so in order to attract the investors. It's not a mystery that the very first law amendment part is the most tricky one, and this is where we are lagging behind. But I think that overall this can be assessed as a very, very positive outflow this far. And once all these 3 criteria are met, we want to have an impact on the pilot region, which can be measured by increased skills of local stakeholders to deliver long-lasting training and to constructors. But also something that we've been modeling for a time being, that each 1 million euro invested in Europace in this local region, we actually create up to 19 local jobs. This is something we've modeled predominantly based on the American experience. But overall, we can say that we want to generate a positive local social impact by addressing energy poverty for the time being. Once all these things are met, we will start scaling Europace across Europe. But since PACE is already also tested in China, in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa. Why not also make PACE for MENA, for South Med? I have to tell you that I've done a very preliminary research this far, but for me it looks like, for example, Moroccan taxation system looks amazing for Europace, because there are two different local taxes to which we could easily assess and add the Europace component. I also think that municipalities are more and more active when it comes to energy efficiency, sustainability. So municipalities across the region also have more and more power, in order to act as this mid-person in Europace projects. The only one thing which I find burdensome for the time being is the perception about property taxes. We've been talking about the property taxation in Egypt, and I know that there have been some mass protests when it was actually implemented. But this is again something that we also see in Europe. For example, in Germany, so the country that was graded as the very suitable for Europace development, the situation is exactly the same. At some point, the Constitutional Tribunal said that property taxation is a bit unfair, and now it makes sense for people to say, I don't want to pay it. And for us, it's actually a very crucial point to know that people are still willing to have this taxation on board. So these are the most crucial aspects. If you want to know more, just give me a shout or write an email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karolina, and thank you also for making the link with the MENA region and showing how your project Europace could potentially be replicated in one of the South Med countries. And I think the transition is perfect for Abeer Elshennawy from American University of Cairo, and also a member of FEMISE, who can give a point of view of a South Med researcher working on climate change issues. So Abeer. Stéphane, tu peux dire à un de tes techniciens de nous aider? On veut mettre ce PowerPoint là à l'écran. Il n'y a pas la souris là? Je sais pas, fais escape peut-être. Il y a la souris là, fonctionne pas. Ça a bugué? On veut le... Ouais, tu peux nous mettre le PowerPoint? C'est lequel celui-là? Non, c'est celui de Abeer Elshennawy. Abeer, can you show him your PowerPoint? C'est la souris qui marche pas.
I just got it.
There's a bug. Le câble peut-être il est...
Non, je sais pas si la souris qui marche mieux. Ok. Ah, c'est bon. This one? Ok. Je sais plus quel bouton c'est par contre pour mettre.
C'est bon, il s'affiche.
Ouais, mode lecture. C'est les présentations? Celui-là?
Super.
Ouais, c'est pas forcément celui-là.
Okay, good morning everyone. First I would like to thank FEMISE and Energies 50 for this opportunity. I will be discussing some pressing questions for South Med region and basically research gaps that we need to address. So the pressing questions are basically how to increase the share of renewable energy and electricity generation, because this is one very important way to mitigate climate change. And the second question is related to the trade-environment nexus, the relationship between trade and the environment. And the third question is how to increase resilience to climate change. Now, in the case of renewable energy, for these questions, I will basically focus on Egypt, but most of the aspects apply also to South Med region. In the case of Egypt, we would like to know to what extent the policies implemented in Egypt, like feed-in tariff, have actually succeeded in stimulating investment in renewable energy, and what type of renewable energy has been was stimulated. Is it hydro, solar, or wind? We would also like to point to the fact that Egypt only implemented the feed-in tariffs when recent research shows that it's most effective when combined with renewable portfolio standards. We also would like to point out to the fact that the effectiveness of these policies cannot be examined in isolation of the institutional environment within which renewable energy investors operate. For example, some investors complain that there's a lot of red tape when it comes to establishing renewable energy investment. Also, what's important here is regulations that allow producers to access or sell renewable electricity to the grid. Also, these need to be put in place to make it easy to undertake investment in renewable energy. Also, we would like to examine the effectiveness of these policies when it comes to stimulating funds, the provision of funds for investment. This is very important because capital markets in South Med countries, and especially in Egypt, are still imperfect, and therefore it's important to know how these policies were able to what extent they were able to stimulate investment in renewable energy and provide funds for investment. In this area, recent research also shows that feed-in tariffs, by providing a more predictable revenue stream, are actually more suitable to alleviate the risk-return profile of renewable energy and thus lead to more private investment in this area. The second area that is under-researched and needs to be a research gap that needs to be addressed is the trade-environment nexus. Now, trade can lead to a cleaner environment basically through because we know as trade stimulates growth, it actually increases revenues for the government through taxation, and these taxes can this tax revenue can be used to provide for a cleaner environment and for pollution abatement. Trade also facilitates access to clean technology, and recent research shows that competition from imports actually forced firms to be more energy efficient, because this is one way to cut down their costs. Also, recent research shows that input trade liberalization through better quality and variety of inputs stimulates or leads to higher productivity, and this in turn lead to better energy efficiency. On the other hand, trade can lead to environmental degradation because lax environmental standards can attract foreign firms that want to locate because it's easier to circumvent environmental regulations, and this is basically the case in the South. The South has lax environmental regulations. Even if regulations exist, they are not enforced. So trade in this respect can lead to environmental degradation as polluting companies relocate in the South. So basically trade has positive effects on the environment, but also can have negative effects on the environment. And a question that needs to be addressed is what is the net effect of trade on the environment in South Med region, and it's still under an issue that is under researched. This is basically important in the context of the EU Med agreement between South Med and North Med countries. The third question is basically related to increasing resilience to climate change, and recent research also has showed that a market-based approach to agricultural developments is the best approach to increase climate resilience, because this approach basically tries to connect the poor to markets and focus on strengthening value chains and identifying market opportunities for the poor. Connecting the poor to markets encourages the cultivations of value crops demanded by the market and thus moving out of subsistence. Basically, farmers that produce for subsistence are the most vulnerable to climate change. Market-based approach improves farmers' access to information, technology, and finance, as well as help farmers meet standards of new formalized markets, both domestically and internationally. It can improve resilience to climate change by improving productivity, as they provide technical assistance to farmers, improve production incentives, and tackle market failures for inputs. So they help farmers diversify and generate more income to smooth consumption, all of which improves the ability to withstand and adjust to climate shocks. However, there can be some trade-offs in this approach, in that market-based approach requires increasing the scale of production, while resilience requires diversifying. So there's tension here between the two goals. Market-based approach focuses on efficiency, while resilience focuses on risk. For example, horticulture in Honduras represented an opportunity for farmers to connect to markets, but they posed risk as they required more water and were more sensitive to droughts and pests. Recent research revealed that market-based approach can increase resilience to market change and is an approach that should be considered in South Med countries. Improving adaptation to climate change is another issue. We know that farmers adapt to climate change basically through intra-crop and inter-crop adaptation. Intra-crop is basically invest in irrigation, use fertilizers and heat resistance varieties and so on. Inter-crop is basically planting crops that are more tolerant to heat. So we want to know how agriculture in South Med region is adapting to climate change. Are farmers adapting or not? And one way to know this is to compare yields in warm areas that are becoming warmer to areas that were not affected by temperature. And if yields in the warmer areas did not fall, then this is an indication that farmers are adapting to climate change. So this is an issue that needs to be investigated in South Med region. Research on Tanzania also shows that poor households are the most vulnerable to temperature shocks, as both TFP and yields and agriculture fall as temperature increases. The poor basically are the ones more vulnerable, as we said before, because they are basically subsistence farmer. So we need to investigate the relationship between climate change and poverty in South Med region and how the poor are adjusting or are able to adjust to adapt to climate change or not. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Abeer, for this very, very thorough presentation as to the needs on South Med research on the climate change agenda. Now I will open the floor for questions that you might have for each other's presentations. I actually have one for you, Karolina. You talked about Europace. You talked briefly about the potential to replicate in MENA. Could you tell us a little bit more as to why Morocco is such a good example for replication, and as to the rest of the region, what do you believe would need to be done in terms of taxation, in terms of legislation, to have, let's say, the prerequisites to have a system such as Europace? And also to Stéphane. Stéphane, what is your point of view regarding trade integration, since it's one of the key questions in Euromed partnership, and about the place of the environment in all of this, and the way to tackle questions and the gaps that remain in terms of the research agenda from a practitioner's point of view? That could also be very, very interesting. So let's start with these two questions. Karolina, maybe you can start.
Of course. So I found Morocco particularly good for Europe's development simply because it has two very different property taxes, or taxes linked to the property, which are still local taxes. So for us, it doesn't really have to be a property tax per se, but it has to be somehow linked to the property in terms of potential foreclosure mechanism. So if you don't pay this tax, the municipality or any other tax authority can basically foreclosure your property, because this is the most important aspect for our investors. And the other fact about Morocco is that there are actually two separate taxes. So if it doesn't work with one, it will probably work with the other one. This is a case which we actually have in Spain for the time being. And that was precisely our estimation, that one of those taxes is more reliable. No, we've been wrong. The other one is actually much better suited to set the base for the European assessment. When it comes to other countries, as I said, I've done very modest research this far, but the biggest barrier I see thus far is the fact that municipalities are not actually collecting the taxes by themselves. There are tax authorities that do it for them, and then obviously transfer the money to the municipalities. But from our perspective, it would be best if it was actually the municipality that collects the money, that administers the whole project, and then it pays back the investors. Another thing I would also like to mention is about this social perception on local taxes. Because if people are not willing to pay them, why would they also take care to pay the European assessment? This is also something we need to take care of, because we see that, for example, countries that were high ranked, such as Germany, might be problematic given this social perception, which is so negative. Thanks.
Thank you, Karolina. Stéphane, maybe you can react, not only with regards to trade integration, but also to what she said and what you think of the potential of such a project.
I think this kind of project, frankly speaking, is very important, because we have also this kind of activities like energy performance contract and these kind of things. So why? Because frankly speaking, we need to find opportunity to have a pedagogic cost-benefit approach on all the sectors. Because we all dream about the leapfrog, we speak about they will avoid. No, they will just repeat because they don't have time, they don't have the technology, and it's just normal, because everybody will go the same way, except if we find some opportunity to explain clearly what is the cost benefit. So I think this kind of process, project, and data are crucial. And I can say that exactly also for energy services. This is not energy, which is a key topic, but what is the value that the energy services will provide. We can give the example, you remember the example of the project in Senegal and in Mauritania, where energy is not the end of the project, but the opportunity to create transformation of milk, because they threw away the milk, because they are not in position to collect and to transform it. And they import almost 99% of the national consumption. So energy here is just to create value, and the value at the end create milk consumption through national production. But this is only the results. Energy is not the key objective, this is consequences. So this is why I love all these technical projects to make sense as soon as we are in position to integrate them in a local dimension perspective about development. So to answer your question, yes, and it has to be, let's say, scale up. I love this word, scale up. So this is the first point. Going back to the trade agreement, I will not say yes or wrong or no, because I think it's such a huge, complex question. So I am not stupid enough to say yes, it's good or not. But to say, I think now we need to find a way to incorporate also a new dimension in cooperation. We are all thinking about north-south, somewhere south-north cooperation, but we need also to focus on the triangular cooperation. And that one is very important. Why? Not only because Asia is coming in Africa, this is absolutely wrong, but because climate change, because now today we are in COP, so we can discuss on different topics, but because climate change will go beyond already existing very difficult situation. And for example, migration. Everybody speaks about migration now, but migration is crucial for the South-South concern. Because now transition, if you go to Lake Chad region, for example, in Zinder area, it is critical because they are already suffering about water's quality, about agriculture, about everything. And at the end, they just have to endorse such a huge number of people which are already searching for just quality of life. So when we think about cooperation, and I will say also trade agreement, mobility agreement, sharing research agenda, and all these issues, we need to really think that now we have to reinvent a new kind of, let's say, pact, to work together toward a common agenda. And when I say that, I think economy is a good entry point, because this is the real world. And if we find to create value on something, it will create a network to be sustainable enough. So when we discuss about energy planning, it makes sense because we can demonstrate. When we discuss about mobility plan, it makes sense. And we need also to stop our vision that they don't have the fund. They pay sometimes services for energy much more higher price than we pay. And it is especially true in Western Africa. So we need to think that reality, climate change, increase the constraints, and trade agreement, policy agreements, MRV global schemes to be consistent is something really as an opportunity. And one word you have expressed, I think, or both of you have already said that, the locking effect. This is something critical, especially about climate change. We don't have time. We know the political framework is a long-time perspective. The local one is a very short time. And for example, if we, again, I will repeat because this is my favorite figure, but for me it's dramatic. Going back to Africa, and it's also true for North Africa, if you look to the city concerns, going from 530 million urban inhabitants to 1.3 billion within the next decade. So just this figure makes things we need to cooperate to put the good data to make when necessary a trade. It can be city level, it can be regional level, it can be national level, it can be triangular level, but as soon as we fix something, but to remain consistent with the climate agenda, SDG ones, and also the financial ones, as well as energy and items. So this can be a way, but yes, to say, to be positive.
Do you want a word about?
Well, I would like to address a little bit of your intervention, but before I would like to share some perception that we have regarding trade in the region from a study that we conducted in 2012. Well, 90% of the exchanges are from north to south, 99% south to north, as just 1% south to south.
I know.
So this is a huge task to change, but it's needed to change. That's why the importance also on the cooperation south-south, on the working together in our climate action activities to promote that sub-regional approach and synergies, because we lose a lot not having even to exchange the experience. I was hearing this one of these days. Why, and they are my member countries also, but why do we need to have Swedish or Finnish or Norwegian experts to deal with the Mediterranean issues? They are welcome, but the point is that we don't find internally in the region expertise. MedECC is a good example of the capacity that we may have, and certainly we have other expertise, but that needs to be a little bit organized to be available. And organizing is not only supporting or financing, but bringing visibility on the availability of the experts. This is a work to be done. But regarding your presentation, I was sensitive for several aspects, even because my background life is on energy, and in Portugal we worked a lot with feed-in tariffs. I have a good perspective, but for this, for the time being, what moved me, it was your references about agriculture, research, climate, agriculture relation. We are working in our climate change dimension, both in tourism, because it's a major economic activity in the region and a fast-growing one, fortunately, if we keep this external perception of stability and security, tourism will move on growing, but that will also put pressure, besides population, on agriculture. We need to feed people. We have several problems tackling and putting pressure on the agriculture capacity and development. So for us, it was, for our member countries, it was identified as a priority to work on. We are working on this, having a first assessment in the situation. It was good to know from you that, once again, we have people in the region working on the situation. So I would like to ask you to elaborate a little bit on what your line of work in your university or on yourself. And secondly, the other point, it was about poverty. And if there is, but it seems to happen, a link between not only climate change, but on the impact of climate change in the poverty situation, and what could be the angles to move on, trying to identify some opportunities to work on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorge. I'm happy for two reasons. First, because the questions you ask are very pertinent, and also because you cite the 2012 study, which was actually co-written by the scientific director of FEMISE, Patricia Augier, and you always, every time I see a UFM representative, they talk about the 90%, 1% figure, which is quite marked, actually. So
I would like an update of that.
Absolutely, we'd be happy to.
I'm a little bit scared if the update will show that we are still in the same
I will
situation.
talk to Patricia about it if she can provide the recent figures. Abeer, and then Jean-Charles, who has a question.
Basically, so far I've worked on climate change and economic growth, and it was a FEMISE funded project, and it was published in Economic Modeling. So we looked at how climate change will affect GDP growth using an intertemperature general equilibrium model. And we looked at several adaptation strategies and how feasible they are and what are the trade-offs. For example, we looked at how climate change will affect productivity of labor and how can we adapt to it through cooling. And we found out that this is not a viable option because adapting through cooling will increase electricity prices, and this will affect cost of production and so on. As for areas that I think we should do research on, for example, the inundation of the Nile Delta and how it will affect agriculture and how it will affect poverty in Egypt. This is one area. And also for tourism, I think heat stress will also affect tourism, and this is one area that we should look at.
Well, thank you. Yes. I will first congratulate all speakers and move back on the ground of science to address special congratulations to Joël Guiot and his team for his excellent initiative about MedECC, which underlines the interest of science to produce and share knowledge for policy making, for providing solutions, for empowerment, for raising awareness. And I would just add another dimension that science may help, which is oriented research action to implement those solutions, to make them acceptable, to promote new ways of life, to encourage local territorial creativity. And this oriented action research needs to involve an interdisciplinary teams with socio-economists, with anthropologists, with legalists, with even artists. And I just say in Marseille we have Joël knows
living lab which is called T Creative, which is encouraging those kinds of action-oriented research. And to conclude, just I cannot resist to say to Karolina that I share her proposals about changes in legal frameworks, and I invite you and all the panel to tomorrow morning to the work, the collaborative work we have to do about legal transition, which is for me a very important subject.
Thank you very much, Jean-Charles. Joël, you want to add a word about MedECC?
I agree with you about the necessity to go from the research to the action, but I have to precise that for the scientists like MedECC, it's the same for IPCC. We don't want to be prescriptive. We propose some tracks to go to different solutions to analyze one according to the others, but it's not the role of scientists to tell to the decision makers, you have to choose that solution, you go to that direction. It's a problem of government, democracy, and so on, and it's not a problem of the scientists. Now, I would like also to address a few words to the specialists of energy. I have one question about the optimal size of the renewable power station, especially for Africa. Is it good to go for very centralized power stations and very big, a lot of gigabytes and so on? Gigawatts, or for at the scale of the village in Africa, is it not better to develop a small power stations? I have seen in a meeting last week, it was about solar concentrated solar power, and I have seen that it was possible to do a small and a big solar station. This, for me, I think that it's not a very good idea to go in the same direction like for the nuclear power, which are big and so on. It's better to go to the small ones. And also, according to MedECC, I have a question also. Why is it so difficult to find a specialist of energy in the science domain? For MedECC, we had a lot of difficulties to find a specialist of energy to participate to the report. I don't know why.
I will answer. We received the call, in fact, but we are so overcharged, so we didn't answer. But by the way, we can contribute because we are producing so many things, but frankly, yes, we can do, because I think it's very important. As I was saying, I was involved in the first renewable energy special report in 2011, and so, but it's really time consuming. That's the only problems. But by the way, trying to answer your question, and I think we can reconnect also with the global debate here. Your question raises another one. What can be the good option in a situation where we are in a hurry? I would say we need a mix. We need a mix. Why? Because if we focus only on big ones, we will face some additional difficulties with the grid, and also with the way they manage the grid and the way they will sell the energy. So it will be a call for tender. So the price will be just profitable enough to attract indirect investments, foreign and direct investment. But on the other side, if they want to really scale up a centralized renewable energy approach, the best way, even for Morocco and in Tunisia, it can be feed-in tariff. So we know, let's say, it can be one way. But the grid concern is critical, especially in Western Africa, in sub-Saharan countries. On the other side, you are fully right. To go fast, we need to decrease the demand. So decentralized approach is, let's say, the most appropriate things. Because here, and in so many cases, the cost analysis is so favorable that we don't even need to put diesel. And diesel, in many cases, it's very good as an entry point because investments are very low. But at the end, to run and operate, it's crazy about the carbon constraint. So I would say it has to be appropriate to the size. And what things which is very funny, we run here an initiative on fossil fuel subsidy reform. And many countries, like in Morocco, but Senegal so far is interested, and it's a global initiative. We are running for the Swiss parts, and we are dealing with some country to discuss on this issue. And this is also something which is incorporated in the IPCC report, the global ones. And it's very crazy because most of these countries subsidize energy, you know, traditional ones. And it costs a huge amount of money. And if we work on demand, as you say in Egypt, but we had a project in the past, a MEDA project. It's far away, but we had a project on energy efficiency in the MEDA region. And it was crazy because most of these countries are not applying relevant policy, even if they have the knowledge. And for example, just going to the buildings, because you speak about the buildings, it's very funny. We have so many initiatives. Only one country is implementing the building codes, Tunisia. And when they designed these building codes and also working on solar panels as a pro-sol project with only a few additional money because it's a revolving fund and it's very appropriate. It was because it was 16% of the national, you know, PIB, which were dedicated to unproductive subsidies to energy. Can you just believe the amount? So they put in place a huge thing on labeling equipment and things. But if you go in all the remaining countries, in Algeria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, they are not applying and they know the rules. So energy, as you say, and you're right, is critical because people don't understand the value of energy to decrease constraints in some other parts. Like in Algeria, can you imagine they have shortage, energy shortage in Algeria? Can you imagine? It really makes no sense because they don't deal with the energy option as a way to develop and to secure the country and to create revenue. And what is critical, and just I will close on just to explain why it is so complex, but at the end, solution is very simple. In Algeria, why they are in an energy crisis? Because it is very simple. Look, you have the energy production. You sell at an international price. That's it. You have the energy subsidized price at the national level. As soon as you have a bad or poor, let's say, policy to support energy demand, you increase energy national, okay? So the gap between what you are in position to finance because of the energy market inside your country is critical. So you create shortage and you create loss of revenue at national level. It really makes no sense. But so to answer, this is the crucial items to work on. We need to put figure research to demonstrate, and maybe I will close also what you both say about the agenda. After I will let's circular. I think research, because you tell that we are not a guidance to provide guidance. I will say yes, you're right. But on the other side, research now is in position because we have so many knowledge to demonstrate opportunities, to demonstrate where it makes sense. And this is exactly the vision of Energy 2050. We say transform opportunities into constraint into opportunities, because a good project makes sense. So research is in position, because you are neutral, to put the correct indicators, to say here, because of, these are the data about the metric, these are the data about the grid, these are the data about, and somewhere, guys like us, take the research and go to policy makers like FEMISE and some other like you, to say, look, this makes sense because of that. So research is critical and important on all these sectors to have the good figure, because nobody can discuss research. Okay, some guys discuss research. We have the good example here, but let's say normally, nobody, because especially IPCC and MedECC and some other, you are transparent. And as you say, the review process is an open one. So normally everyone who have bad idea or controversial idea, other data can provide it. So this is trying to make the link, but you're right, energy is critical.
Just a small comment to go towards what Stéphane just said. Stéphane, we actually share the same point of view as to the role of, we share the same point of view as to the fact that the studies that we produce need to be more than just studies, and since we need to capitalize on them in a way. So indeed, as you say, maybe we're not in a position to say that we are right, this is the way to do it. Of course, this well, we need to avoid doing something like that, and we need to be modest, etc., etc. But we do have a role in awareness raising, if you will, in reaching towards policymakers and presenting the situation to show them and to actually say that now you know. They cannot say that they do not know about the impact on this or that indicator. What you do with it afterwards, this is an open process, we can discuss, it's a multi-stakeholder approach, etc., etc. But I believe we do have this role to raise awareness in these questions. An issue that has been slightly cited here and there is the issue of data. To produce academic research, to produce research, we need data. And data is scarce, especially in the South Med countries. Abeer, maybe you can tell us a little bit more as to the obstacles that you found in terms of finding data, the solutions that you also found, and also what an actor like MedECC, for example, which is a platform to share scientific knowledge, could help in facilitating the obtention of data.
Well, in the case of the environment, data is a very big constraint because they don't give you any data about pollutants or about the state of the environment or anything of this kind. So I think one way that research institutes can help is by inviting policymakers from the Ministry of the Environment to hear us talk about our research and our problems and our constraints, and highlighting that they must reach to academicians and researchers from universities, or else the environmental problems will never be solved.
A short mention. If we go to the agenda of the negotiation, we call it Article 6, and also the way we are going to report in the different registry or transparency. So at the end, this is crucial, and normally this is a commitment for governments to put data to make it available, because the reporting process needs data. So I can only support what you say. This is crucial. This is a policy decision at the end, because at the end, as soon as you put in place a policy or you put subsidies, you are in position to say the other way is to be compulsory to provide data. This is the only way, but you're right. This is the crucial items, and in almost all the country, it is difficult. Maybe I will make a special mention of Morocco, because they have an observatory, which is now with regional approach. It starts to be a very nice process. We are lacking of, let's say, very localized data, but by the way, I think everyone's need to be, let's say, focusing, like you say, about data. That's true.
Yes, about data again. Yeah, it's right. Data is very important. We need that for science. It's really the basic way to work. It's to collect data. And in fact, for the certain countries, sometimes or maybe often the data are existing, but we don't know where they are. And I think we need the methodology, maybe money, to collect the data. And in this case, it's really necessary to design a project together between different countries to collect the data. For example, I know a network on the big cities in the Méditerranée, where people from Marseille and other places are working with people from Egypt, Tunisia, Turkey, and so on, to collect the data about the cities. In fact, we see that the data are existing. It's just necessary to know where they are and how to collect them.
Also, a problem is that even if the data is available, the quality of the data is not very good. The quality of the data. So this is also a big problem. But in terms of collecting data, this is can be very helpful, because, for example, the one research I did regarding pollution was on carbon dioxide emissions, and I was able to do it because the World Bank publishes carbon dioxide emissions in the World Development Indicators. So collecting data from the region can be very helpful for this.
Okay. So maybe we can have one last word from each of us to a closing word, and then sum up what has been said.
I would like to stress that the Euromed agreement is a great opportunity to improve environmental conditions in South Med region, and up till now this route has not been exploited, and we hope that it will be exploited in the
as the clean energy transition is just starting as we speak, we cannot forget that the buildings, or actually the places where we spend 90% of our time, need to be taken care of as well. So in order to achieve the goals of zero emission buildings by 2050, we need to act now and increase the percentage of retrofits from 1% to 3% annually.
I would add that if you want things to go forward in terms of climate action, we must not treat the environment as a separate theme, but integrate it in a transversal way in each thematic. And this is the only way where that will allow for policy stakeholders and other stakeholders to be truly aware of what is happening and really have a dialogue that moves forward on these issues.
Thank you. Just two brief things. Firstly, this was a good example of what we need to do in the region, which is networking and cooperating. This is the key, and bring up the visibility of what we have done. The second aspect I would like to add is that the continuity of our actions is a preparation for the future. You mentioned buildings. They are not only, of course they are, but not only the spaces where we live. 90% of our life is our negative footprint if you still act like we do for the future. Buildings have a lifetime more expanded than our lifetime, so it's really a good motivation, a good example to move on and to move all of us to try to change something.
Thank you. You already say almost the key point. So now I will say collaboration makes sense. This is clear, and the good example of the stakeholders around the table are here. Research on one side, the practitioner, the policy side, economic side, and sectorials, let's say, on this example. To say we need to combine everything, and because at the end we need to speak the same wording, because they are the same global agenda. So, and as you mentioned, I think continuity. It has to be not step by step, it has to be something to be continuous, because it's create knowledge, confidence, trusty, and about indicators, everything. At the day by day, we can create and reinforce existing. So I think continuity and global networks to work together and to be complementary.
Yeah, networking is very important, and in fact, I forgot to mention that one of the ambition of MedECC, it's also to identify the gaps of the knowledge. For scientists, it's important to know where we have to do research to improve the knowledge, but also by discussing with the decision makers and the policy makers where they want to do, where they want scientists to do research to improve the knowledge, which is directly applicable for the society. And this discussion between scientists and society people is very important for the problem of climatic change and others, in fact.
Yes, I would like to thank for all the presentation on the exchanges. I think most have been said. I just maybe like to add that when MedECC was launched 3 years ago by scientists, since then we see that the policymakers, or the institution, they are interface between scientists and policymakers. They are really open to what we want to offer. So I think that both parties are ready for the dialogue. I think that it improves, and I think there is the big future for this kind of network exchanges. And so thank you.
Thanks again for this very research for action side event, or action for research. I think we have found some new opportunities to have new authors and contributors for the MedECC report for next year, and we will find some more, I think, in the future. We also, I think, have good ideas of what could be added as inputs from the network in relation with our memorandum of understanding that we will be signing here at COP24, today and tomorrow, in terms of data collection and development of networks for data collection. Thanks, Jorge.
Thank you very much, Arnaud. Thank you, everyone. All the summary of what has been said today will be available quite soon. Karine took lots of notes. Thank you, Karine, and thank you to the team for following this. I will ask all of you to stay for a brief moment for a group photo. Thank you.